guys, welcome back to another video about, you guessed it, Monster Hunter. With the amount of weird and wacky creatures present in the entire series, Monster Hunter does an outstanding job of showcasing a masterclass in creature design for the most part. Sure, there are some duds here and there, but we aren't talking about them today. Quite the opposite, actually. The world of Monster Hunter is entirely fictional. It's a fantasy setting that overall we actually don't know that much about, but what we do know is that it's largely based on a loose form of reality. Sure, we don't have dragons or wyverns or humans that can pull off the same crazy shit that hunters can in the real world, but everything in the series is built on the concept of, and I always struggle to say this without tripping over my own words, imaginative realism. There are no wizards or warlocks, there are no magical steeds and talking weapons, and the concept extends to the designs of the monsters themselves. Each of them comes across as some sort of animal, a believable creature in a believable world. And that's something that's a challenge in and of itself when creating a 30-foot long behemoth that spews fire or lightning or whatever element you want to pick. The developers really have a way of flexing their creativity in grounded designs that are colourful both literally and figuratively. And today I want to take a look at a few monsters that show off particularly strong designs that have been executed in a fun and interesting way that blends well with the world of Monster Hunter. These aren't necessarily my favourite monsters overall, though we will talk about my favourite monster. I just think they're really neat designs. So without further ado, I am Peak Ginge, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's talk about creature designs in Monster Hunter. Now there's probably an argument to be made that just about every design in the series is pretty good and well thought out. Rathalos, for example, is a strong design. Yes, it's memorable, it's iconic, but it's pretty simple and pretty safe. You can't really go wrong with a red fire-breathing dragon. And that's why the first monster I want to talk about today, to set the tone of this video, is one that's not necessarily safe. One that was given to us all the way back in Monster Hunter 2 and reinvigorated in Rise. And that is the Camellios. Not necessarily the most interesting combat-wise, sure, especially in the older games. Camellios is a curious case for a monster because by all metrics, it entirely subverts expectations. Visually, it doesn't really meet any of the rules of cool requirements that a lot of the rest of the monsters do in the series, nor is it as creepy as something like the Kezu. It's also largely based on an animal that is the exact opposite of intimidating. Chameleons are just about the slowest moving lizards around, don't get much bigger than your forearm, and are considered cute by most people, but I would say that's exactly why the juxtaposition of the Camellios works as well as it does. Despite its inspirations, Camellios was one of the largest and most erratic moving elder dragons of its time, excluding the colossal ones of course, and was introduced as part of a trio of monsters alongside Kushala Daora and Teostra, two monsters that are pretty stereotypically and intentionally cool. It also behaves a lot like a chameleon despite its size, and constantly gives off this vibe that it's kind of intrigued by you and is kind of toying with you as well, not going all out in the battle. Its purple coloration clearly alludes to its use of poison, but also portrays a mystical, unnatural quality to it, I think. A quote from the developers reads as follows: "With Monster Hunter 2, we intentionally tried going with a more fantastical feel to our designs, and I'd say Camellios encapsulates that best of all." They also go on to say that the idea of an invisible dragon came first, and then a chameleon motif, rather than the other way around, which I found quite interesting, and they even said we weren't sure if this was really the way to go with this creature, so it got set on the back burner for a while. An interesting point to consider just how many monsters never made it off that back burner. Overall, whilst on the surface it may seem hard to imagine how such a goofy and lumbering creature could ever cause a calamity, its undeniable mischievous nature is certainly more than enough to send a whole region into disarray. Camellios manages to feel silly but strong, cute but menacing, magical but realistic, and is one of the most unique and well executed creature designs Monster Hunter has ever given us. Now for a bit of a change of pace as we redirect and touch on my favourite monster in the series, Brachydios. As Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate's flagship monster, Brachydios is a truly unique and awesome creature design in just about every single way. Its initial design motif was to make a monster based on a missile, and you can see this in the shape of its horns and arms as well as their explosive properties. The explosions themselves are probably the most interesting aspect of the monster, as rather than using some form of inherent element or breath attack, Brachydios uses a unique slime mold that affixes itself to its head and arms. Sure, a symbiotic relationship between a monster and another organism isn't unique or even original to Brachydios. I mean, Zinogre was released shortly before it with a similar concept, but the effort that has gone into it to somehow make a dinosaur with explosive punches believable is truly impressive. The slime mold covers Brachydios' body and is primed to explode by its own saliva, which can be seen in-game as it licks its forearms. On top of that, the idea to make its arms the focus, making them bigger and stronger, make it completely unique compared to every other brute wyvern in the game, all of which have tiny, nearly useless forelimbs, and the striking appearance lended to it by combining the bright greens and yellows of the slime against its shiny blue-purple carapace make for a visual that stands out as one of the most striking in the series. God, I love Brachydios, dude. It's just so good. The creativity and out-of-the-box thinking that goes into such a design is really quite amazing, and don't even get me started on the Iceborne iteration of Raging Brachydios, which is just so good as well, if not a little bit scripted combat-wise, but we don't care about the combat here today. So enough of me gushing over my favourite monster, I won't do too much of that, I promise. Let's now turn our attention to the early game. In each Monster Hunter game, there are a few trends or tropes that have persisted throughout the entire series. Your first big monster hunt is usually against a pack leader raptor monster, or a lizard in World's case. The flagship monster is almost never the final boss. The colossal monster is usually pretty boring, but you kinda like it anyway for some reason. And of course, how could I forget the early game flying bird wyvern ready to be your first wall? Yarn Kutku, Puke Puke, Aknasom, these fellas that show up around the 2 or 3 star mark to lay down the law and put newbies in their place. But there's one that stands out above the rest in terms of intriguing creature design, I feel, and that is of course Gen 3's very own Kirapeko. With visual elements and animations wholly unique to itself and its subspecies, Kirapeko is probably one of the most memorable monsters around for those who have been invested in Monster Hunter for a while, and it is definitely a monster that is absolutely bursting with character and personality. The hunter can frighten it, causing it to run away and fall flat on its face. It dances in several different ways as it sings its songs. It has an entirely unique walking animation as it holds its head high and bobs it to a non-existent beat, and I'm only talking about its animation so far. Iconic visual elements such as its trumpet-like beak and gigantic air sac are used to show off and execute its unique trait, singing songs that can buff itself and summon other monsters to help it fight by mimicking their cries. Kirapeko is relatively unassuming and not very difficult. That is until you're suddenly facing down a Rathian or a Rathalos with your starter gear on. It also produces fire attacks in its own unique way by spitting out flammable liquid that it ignites with 2 flint-like scales on each of its wings. It's an erratic and entertaining creature that is a perfect example of the goofy, fun-loving attitude that makes Monster Hunter unique and not just some dark, gritty monster fighting game. And it's a real shame we haven't seen it in a mainline game since the 3rd generation, I think. Alright, now from entertaining and silly to downright dangerous and aggressive, let's now take a look at a member of the Fated 4 that isn't necessarily my favourite one, but it's absolutely fascinating how the developers managed to make its design motif work so well. I'm talking, of course, about the Astalos. Now, if I was to say, picture a creature that is the amalgamation of like 5 or 6 different kinds of insects with mantis-like claws adorning butterfly wings, a long dragonfly tail tipped with earwig pincers, a pulsating crest, cricket vibrations to charge and chirp, and beetle plates covering its whole body, the thing that would come to mind would probably be downright horrifying. But that's what Astalos is, and somehow, someway, they managed to make it work really, really well. By leaning into the wyvern body plan and making it still maintain reptilian features, the bug adornments skirt the line of creepy and make for a truly iconic design. The iridescent sheen that you see covering its wings and body plating really do a lot of the heavy lifting visually too, because it's not like Astalos' green-brown color is terribly appealing otherwise. That being said, the purpose of the color is to allow the dazzling greens of its charged state to contrast and shine, and it absolutely nails that on all accounts, I'd say. Every part of its body also pulsates and twitches to generate electricity, something that could also be quite unsettling if it wasn't for the fact that Astalos always seems to be just positively bursting with rage, and so it also works really well. All in all, Astalos is a perfect example of a motif that shouldn't work as well as it does, and shows off the skills of the devs in more ways than one. Astalos stands up there with the best of them in terms of memorable designs, especially with its recent appearance in Sunbreak. So we are now approaching the end of this video, but there are 2 more monsters that I'd like to focus on because of their unique qualities. One of them being particularly creepy and off-putting, and the other being almost silly in its visuals and animations. But the first of the 2 is Iceborne's brand new Elder Dragon, Namiel. In a game where you had a dragon that was covered in rotting flesh, one that looked like something the Predator would hunt, and a creature that stared into your very soul as it tried to vibrate your body to pieces, Namielle still stands out as a particularly creepy design in my mind. Much like Camellios and Astalos, it's a creature that is a little bit odd in concept, with its design being derived from deep-sea creatures like rays, octopus, and jellyfish. Taking such properties and applying them to a giant winged dragon seems difficult and not terribly intuitive, but once again, here we are. Namielle, particularly in its intro cutscene for Iceborne, is scary. It shrouds you in darkness and you can only see these little bioluminescent lights pulsating, hypnotizing the player, and it has this aura about it that conveys that it's a little more cunning and intelligent than other monsters, that it really knows what's going on. Visually, its wings are its most striking quality and are more akin to something like a vampire squid, coming across as a series of webbed tentacles rather than standard wings. They emphasize this in how articulated they are in their animation as well, and on the rare occasion that you see Namielle fly, it more so glides like a stingray would underwater, except, you know, it's in the sky. Namielle just feels really menacing, and overall was a fantastic implementation of a monster that uses both lightning and the most underserved element, water, and it truly feels like it fits the moniker of Elder Dragon really well. And the last monster for today's video is almost certainly not one that might come to mind when you think of impressive creature designs, and that is none other than the Uragaan. On the heftier side for a brute wyvern, Uragaan is truly a monster like no other. Except for Radabarn now, I guess. But you know what I mean. A creature built to demonstrate the huge diversity within the brute wyvern class of monsters, especially when you put it beside the likes of Brachydios. Uragaan has on the surface some of the most bizarre and funny animations and visual design elements present in mainline Monster Hunter, and it still manages to work wonderfully. Sure, it might be hard to find someone who has Uragaan as their #1 favorite monster, but it certainly sticks out in mind as a weird one. With its main weapon being an enormous chin that it tries to crush you with, and these pillar-like scutes that line its entire body, it has a silhouette that almost makes it seem artificial. And then the animations start. One of, if not the most iconic thing that Uragaan will do, is curl up into a ball and roll around like a gigantic wheel, and honestly, out of all the attacks in Monster Hunter, being crushed by an Uragaan rolling over the top of you seems like one of the worst ways to go. This attack even had its own area in Try that was basically designed for the purpose of letting Uragaan show off how much speed it can pick up when doing it. Much like Kirapeko, it's a monster that has a bit of creative liberty woven through it and doesn't take itself too seriously, and yet, even with all those elements, doesn't feel out of place in the series. And so we now come to the end of my little list of creative and colorful monsters. The devs over at Capcom certainly have a pretty strong creative drive behind them, while still managing to ground the series and designs in some loose form of reality. It's pretty rare for a monster design to overlap and impose too heavily on another unless intentionally done so, and each monster brings with it its own character and personality. There's many more excellent designs on top of those I went over in this video, so don't take these 6 monsters as the be-all and end-all of fantastic design. They were just a few that I think stand out in particular. Why not let me know your favorite design in the comments down below? If you like this video, why not give it a like and share it with a friend if you think they'll like it too. That's all from me today, folks. I'll catch you on the next one. See you later.